begin with that, I thought I'd sort of talk about how I got into working with textiles, which is sort of very rooted in my childhood. My mom used to be sort of a dressmaker, she made clothes. And I'd sit with her at the sort of kitchen table and sort of like to keep me occupied, she'd give me like a little cloth bag and she'd draw on it, embroidery bits of wool. So kind of like this is where I think like the root of it lies. But I started kind of like working sort of quite intently, probably around 2011. I had sort of quite a hard time, and sort of like I suppose the way sort of life had sort of disintegrated. So I was inspired by I suppose like my Buddhist practice to sort of try and find ways in which I could sort of improve my situation. And the way I did this was kind of to go back to working with like textiles. So initially I bought kind of like a big bag of scrap fabrics, and sort of when I was working with them, I sort of kind of tipped them out on the floor and looked at them, and it was all jumbled up. And I sort of really felt like, this is how I feel really. So I kind of went through this process of sorting through everything, and sort of but not throwing anything away, not discarding anything, and sort of looking for the value in each scrap of fabric, and sort of trying to find ways in which to use it constructively, really. So a lot of the imagery I use kind of comes very much sort of from images and stuff I sort of get flashing through my mind. It's almost like I almost see like a finished object, and kind of as I start working on it, sort of the meaning of it kind of like comes through for me. So it's kind of like I'll get like a picture of like the dog, for instance, is one of a thing that kind of comes up a lot in my work. And initially I was quite scared of it. It was kind of like it started off as a wolf, and it had quite negative connotations for me. But as I worked on it and kind of worked sort of stitching it in and sort of all this kind of stuff, different layers of meaning to kind of come up. So it sort of transformed into a dog, which I suppose like to me represents, it's still quite fierce, but it's kind of, it's constructive. It's almost like anger that's been channeled into a constructive and useful manner. So it's kind of, it's friendly, but at the same time it doesn't take any shit either or off you. So it's kind of, it's almost like a total image in a way. Other images that I use kind of are sort of birds. Bird image that came up from a dream I had where I dreamt that this very small, delicate bird was caught in this kind of hose pipe, actually. Not like a bird, I think it's like this flushing hose pipe. And it was really struggling to sort of escape, and eventually kind of managed to fly off into the sky. And strangely, kind of over the next few days, a lot of bird-related stuff happened where I had sort of one of my cats brought in this bird, and kind of, rather than leave it out in the cold because it looks dead, I put it by sort of Buddhist shrine I've got in my little studio, and I sort of chanted for it and sort of left it in one of the cat boxes. And the next morning when I went down, it sort of revived, and it was flying around in the room, and I sort of let it out into the sky. A couple of days after that, I had a friend come round for a meal, and she brought me this beautiful ceramic bird that she made, and so I was just like, okay, I'm using that. So the bird, which was a bit kind of like, here's my work quite a lot, and I think for me it represents the sort of delicate nature of freedom, actually, and sort of, the delicacy of freedom, I think. Other things that come from my work are technology. I sort of spend a lot of time on trains, and I'm a great people watcher, and I've sort of noticed over, especially over the past few years, kind of that people tend to use technology a lot to sort of almost, modify their social experience in a way, sort of like it's almost like people being uncomfortable just to sit. So it's kind of everybody's like, texting, phoning, taking selfies, and it's just like, I sort of observe this a lot, and sort of, people walking down the road and just sort of walking out to the street on their phones, and it's kind of, it's just something I didn't notice like 5 or 6 years ago, so I'm quite obsessed with this do a lot of work on technology and stuff at the moment. Other sort of things that pop into my work are, we use quite a lot as well, which you'll sort of see also here. And those sort of to me represent, I'm always looking for like the answers for stuff. And I suppose in one way, sort of a lot of symbols that I use kind of like have different meanings depending on the context of the rest of the work. But for me, sort of like the wheels, I suppose, in a way represent sort of like, there's an element of like joy and pleasure of life and that kind of stuff. But the other side of it, there's kind of impressive, sort of patriarchal sort of violence to it as well. So again, it depends on the context of the work. I use a lot of striky fabrics in my work. Because aesthetically I really like them, but they have also a meaning of, to me, sort of they represent sort of like the ongoing sort of cycling drama of sort of life and death and sleeping, waking, and being conscious and unconscious and sort of like thinking. I also kind of recently been thinking about, you know, it's textile, it's fabric, so it's kind of like, especially the striking bit that represents life and death, what would happen if that happened, what lies behind that, which is just a bit of a tangent I've been going on recently. So yeah, there's a lot of stripes, and I try and sort of suppose in a way the actual imagery is almost kind of like the sort of daily dramas of life, that almost like the drama of the ongoing cycle of life. I also use quite a lot of erratic stitching in my work, and that for me is very much about sort of, it was quite an intense experience stitching for a long period of time, and because it's quite a delicate, almost mindful thing. It's, I noticed a lot of sort of inner fluctuations and stuff in my mood and my life state. So that's represented by kind of sort of like stitching the actual this collage of fabrics. What's going to say now? Yeah, the erratic stitching sort of represents that sort of change in fluctuation in mood, but also sort of kind of life is like that. It's sort of, it's not linear. It's sort of, you kind of think, oh, I'm just going to go over there. You always end up kind of like going off on some sort of tangent or down some strange route. So it's kind of very much like how I experience life, really. A lot of my themes are quite inward looking, so it kind of like, it's almost kind of almost like my inner dynamics. But also, I kind of observe a lot, as I said earlier, people, social scenes, and I kind of almost try and, when I'm working with something, look for the meaning of the interactions I'm observing, why are people acting like that. You know, for instance, with this piece, this was inspired by a trip I had in Berlin. And we were walking down sort of quite an affluent shopping street, and there was this older lady sort of selling, I guess what would be sort of the Berlin version of the Big Issue. And I was really intrigued how people would sort of react to her, kind of these quite sort of statuesque, sort of very well dressed sort of ladies were walking down the road, and I noticed when I observed her, they kind of like their handbag looking for something like this. Almost as if it was some sort of like shield or like talisman to sort of ward off the evening stuff, I guess, in a way. And I noticed, I observed also kind of like they do that with each other. And I just found it really interesting, sort of how we, as we perhaps use social status of an object to sort of protect ourselves, you know, of vulnerability, which I think we all need actually. This is the bird. Yeah, sort of, again, a motif I use a lot as well is the heart, and kind of like, so I was brought up Catholic, so kind of like there's a lot of sort of iconography around when I was in this, and it reminds me sort of going to my grandparents' house. So I had this kind of idea about sort of, you know, my grandparents kind of like had this kind of catechism, it's like a little book, and it sort of explained what the Sacred Heart of Jesus meant, and I sort of, through sort of like working on my artwork and sort of like religious practice work, came to my own conclusions about what it meant, but it's more about sort of having, using in a way open-heartedness to sort of become softer and more vulnerable and more open, and that actually sort of suffering can be transformed into something quite beautiful. So I use the heart motif quite a lot. It's usually sort of in correlation with bird. There's the readings. This particular piece, this was kind of inspired actually by kind of growing up. I grew up on like a council estate in Birmingham, and it's kind of quite camp, bright orange dreadlocks, and everybody used to call me Paul George, frankly. And this was kind of, in a way, sort of, I suppose, a sort of piss cake in a way of kind of my daily experiences like at that time. But also at the same time, sort of, the guy who's got the gun there, it's kind of, it's actually upside down, so he's actually shooting himself. Like kind of being so aggressive in a way. But also at the same time, it's like, I like to have sort of quite a positive feeling on that. So we've got the sun there, and it's sort of, it is shining on everybody because it's kind of like all here. So, I don't think there's anything else I've got to say. That's kind of it really. So yeah, that's my work.